What's up, everybody? Welcome into a very unexpected edition of SSPN, Ethan. I know we've maybe talked about this from
hmm
time to time, probably not that much though. Maybe mentioned it here or there as maybe being a possibility, but really not giving it that much thought or credence or, putting much weight under it happening. But here we are, Ethan. Let me go ahead and pull up the tweet from Adrian Wojnarowski. It is a crazy day in Spurs world. Free agent Chris Paul has agreed to a 1-year, $11 million plus deal with the San Antonio Spurs. I believe Chris Haynes was the first to report it, Ethan. But there you have it. Right in front of us, you've got a little bit of his numbers underneath from Stat Mamba. 12 points per game last season, 7.3 assists per game with 1.3 turnovers. And even in last year, what wasn't, CP3's best year from a lot of people's standards. When you look over
hmm
the history of his career, still a ton of efficiency. And we know that in this situation on the Spurs, Ethan, it will be an even more unique and specific situation that really pertains even more to his skill set. Now, that's not to say that this 38, I believe, year old version of Chris Paul is not going to have his deficiencies. But overall, Ethan, I mean, on the first day of free agency, before the night has even, really begun, it's not even 8 o'clock yet. Um, Chris Paul is a San Antonio Spur.
It's crazy. This was a childhood dream of mine to have CP3 on the San Antonio Spurs because I grew up in the era of Lob City, right? So he was the best point guard in the NBA when I was coming into my fandom. Obviously, Steph Curry overtook him pretty quickly, but CP3 as a field general and what he brings to the game as a small point guard was very meaningful for me in my early development. But him on the Spurs, you touched on his statistics last year with Golden State. I don't think that that's a good barometer to judge him by. I know he's actually 39 years old, Jude, not
Okay, thank
38.
you.
Of course. So I know he's not going to have the impact that he had when he went to OKC initially or when he went to Phoenix initially, where they immediately became finals contenders. He's not going to have that same level of impact. I don't even know if this, as a team stands right now, with no other additional free agency signings, we're not a playoff team, obviously. Makes us a little bit better, though. And I think he has the opportunity to be a mentor to Stephon Castle, Trey Jones, Blake Wesley, and even Victor Wembanyama. I know they play completely different positions, but Chris Paul's an uber professional, and we saw the impact he had with Shea Gilgeous-Alexander in the Oklahoma City team, with Devin Booker in Phoenix. So I think if we're going to judge his statistics and what he could maybe bring to the Spurs, I think we have to base it on his last year in Phoenix, and maybe even a little bit less than that. But his last year in Phoenix, he averaged 13.9 points per game and 8.9 assists, 4 boards on pretty much the same efficiency, 44% from the field, 37.5% from three. So I think that can be the expectation from him. And I can immediately already feel the tweets going out or the people in the comments saying, what does he bring differently than Trey Jones? Like, that's going to be the first thing because he is small and
Right.
defensively he's going to be, that's going to be the hardest part for him is just staying in front of guys. He's Chris Paul. That's all I can say. If you don't understand that, then we just can't discuss this because as great as Trey Jones is, he is not the same level of playmaker or leader that Chris Paul is. So I think that immediately gives him the leg up on Trey Jones. Obviously, Trey Jones is more athletic, more young. Maybe he can be better than Chris Paul statistically next year, but I think his impact will be majorly on the non-box score side of things, Jude.
Can't forget about Chris Paul's shooting too.
Yes, much better shooter. Not much better. He is a better shooter than Trey Jones.
Yes, and while Ethan, we did just pull up the numbers. I'm not exactly sure what his three, if that was one of his 3 point percentages. So I'm gonna go double check that as we speak, Ethan. But I believe I want to go ahead and check his 3 point percentage from last season. So
37.
yeah, 37%, which it isn't anything crazy, but it's still an improvement in comparison to Trey Jones. And I think that still with the open looks that he'll get this
Mhm.
season, next to Victor Wembanyama, as well as the other guys that we have on the roster, I think, a lot of those looks could be much more open than before. Granted, he was on, a team like Golden State that did have a lot of players, but I think the role in the system and just the situation was still
Yes.
a little bit different there as well. But talking about his fit on the roster, Ethan, well, first of all, before I get into that, you touched a little bit on just some of the leadership qualities that he can
Mhm.
have. And that makes me go back to his days where he kind of mentored Shea Gilgeous-Alexander
Yep.
when he was in Oklahoma City. So to me, definitely you can kind of see the parallels, and maybe that the Spurs have a plan to help him not just mentor a lot of the other guys on the roster like you mentioned, but really our fourth pick, Stephon Castle, is good. Everybody says, like, is he a point guard yet? Is he ready to be there? There's questions about him being ready, even if he can be. Well, if you bring in Chris Paul to help teach him a lot of things,
Mhm.
that can definitely set him up to be the point guard of the future. But I'm kind of going to give you a lot of an open-ended question here, Ethan.
Okay.
What do you think this does to the point guard rotation?
Mhm.
Like, is Stephon going to play there this year with still having Trey and CP on the roster? Because initially that kind of feels like what would be the two true point guards, to come in. Um, but also, I think that what I just said is very true too. And I think it's probably a reality in the sense that he's going to mentor Stephon a lot, especially with Stephon's pre draft comments and all of that. But really, I guess what I'm asking you is lineups wise and matchups rotation wise for the Spurs. How do you think? What are your thoughts on it?
I think you have to start Chris Paul. I think without a doubt you have to start him because one of the biggest difficulties for us last year was when we didn't start Trey Jones. We saw how that looked. I'm not saying that would be the reality with Stephon Castle at point guard. I still think Stephon's a major improvement over Jeremy Sohan at point guard. Uh, but I mean, you signed him. He's going to open up things for the not even just Wembanyama, but for the entire team. So you have to play him, and I think you even have to play Stephon Castle next to him. So I think Stephon has to play small forward, and the starting lineup is going to be Chris Paul, Devin, Stephon, Jeremy, and Victor Wembanyama.
That is very interesting, Ethan, and I probably would bet on that being the most, the easiest solution, if you will. But here's something maybe that you haven't thought of, and I still would say that I think that that's the case. But while you were talking, I was thinking maybe another potential could be that Stefan's the backup two off the bench.
Mhm,
But I really feel like our top four pick is going to be in the starting lineup, Ethan, and especially with what we just saw from him at the wing this past season for UConn,
mhm.
as well as his size. I think that's got to be the starting lineup as well.
And Chris Paul's no spring chicken. So I think he averaged 26 minutes per game last year on Golden State. So he'll start the game. He'll probably sit first, let Stephon have some reps at point guard, and then you have Trey Jones as well in that rotation just to sure things up whenever Chris Paul needs an extra rest or Stephon's just not cutting the cheese. You can flip-flop those guys and have a three pretty elite point guard rotation honestly with all three of those guys.
And another thing that I'm thinking about as you're saying this is that we're still going to need somebody to guard those primary ball handlers because
Exactly.
Chris Paul is not going to be guarding Luka Doncic or Shea Gilgeous-Alexander or Anthony Edwards.
Mhm.
So that once again probably leads to the idea of Stephon playing the three. And this is just a 1-year deal, Ethan.
Yes.
So this is a great way to kind of teach him things along the way and kind of, maybe incrementally increase Stephon Castle's playmaking responsibilities so that we
Mhm.
don't have, and I still think he's coming at it from a completely different place than Jeremy last season. But
Mhm.
also, this kind of sets us up to kind of do that, like I said, incrementally throughout the season, learning from Chris Paul to where he's not just thrust into it and then it just kind of explodes in our face like we saw last season.
And it gives us one more full year to find a better solution at small forward permanently. Because that is the biggest gaping hole right now. I don't think we're gonna go get Paul George now. I don't think that's in
Right.
the cards. So, we have him at small forward just for one season to learn under the tutelage of one of the greatest playmakers of all time. And then who knows, maybe we're able to draft Cooper Flag and he's our small forward of the future.
Right. We'll have to see how all those picks play out, what Atlanta ends up doing if they trade
Mhm.
Trey Young as well. Because if that's the case, what you just mentioned could maybe potentially be a real possibility. But again, it's kind of funny, Ethan, because now on the first day of free agency, the 1 and the 3, if it plays out the way that we think it is, have been addressed. And
Mhm.
that also kind of allows the bench to kind of there's less questions on the bench, especially with Mamu getting a qualifying offer yesterday. And then
Mhm.
now, if we're going to start Stephon at the three, then okay, Keldon's still going to be the backup three. Malachi and Blake battling for minutes in the backup two, and then probably Mamu is the backup four. And I mean, we'll see what happens with that center position. Maybe the Spurs make one more move, but as time is progressing, Ethan, despite the criticisms that we've had this season, I feel like, I mean, and we'll have to see. I'm saying this on day one of free agency in the early hours after something crazy that we didn't think was going to happen just happened. So
Mhm.
that's a testament. But it does feel like there might be a chance that we may just be rolling with Charles Bassey and Zach Collins heading into next year for the backup five.
I would say that's very likely, and I think Zach Collins, unless he just resurges this year, I think he's probably a trade candidate at the deadline.
Yeah, and we'll just have to see how that plays out, Ethan. But this Chris Paul signing, crazy.
Ugh.
It brings up some more questions, Ethan, but it also answers some. The last thing that we'll talk about here, what are your thoughts about the two-man game in the pick and roll with Wemby and CP?
Oh my god, it's gonna be crazy. I don't care how old Chris Paul is, he could still come off a screen and throw a lob or drop a pocket pass better than probably anybody in the league to this day. So, immediately that chemistry is gonna be there, they're gonna start building it, and we won't have the same people in the comments complaining that nobody can throw him a lob because at least one guy absolutely can.
Absolutely, Ethan. And, the last thing that I'll say about Chris Paul, just bringing in that veteran presence, someone
Mhm.
who's, as much as he has not gotten the ultimate prize, the Spurs have. So the
Yep.
championship tutelage and culture is already in the franchise and with the coaching staff.
Yep.
But with Chris Paul himself, just, I mean, the experience and tidbits and NBA knowledge that he's going to give our roster as a whole, on top of, mentoring our point guards and really, the whole team
Yep.
playmaking wise, um, it's just going to be invaluable, Ethan.
And I think it signifies a change in the front office and the coaching staff's mentality. The past couple years, it's been we're going to lose, and that's okay. With Chris Paul coming in, he's not going to tolerate losing.
Right.
Like he is going to demand at least competitive will the entire time he's in that locker room. So I'm not saying we're going to be playoff teams, but he's going to have the winning mentality from the get go.
Absolutely, Ethan. And any final thoughts? I think that about wraps things up.
I forgot I got one.
Okay.
Is he going to get the number three, or is Keldon Johnson going to keep number three?
That's such a good question. I feel like he's going to get number three. Um,
What did KJ wear in college? Was it three?
it was three, I'm pretty sure.
Hmm.
So, I mean,
He'll
some
get he'll
people
get 3. He'll get
some people might say that this is a signal of a Keldon trade because of that. I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think if we're trading Keldon, that probably coincides with a lot of other things, not just the number change specifically. But if
3.
Keldon is on the roster, I mean, it's CP3. Like, I'd be hard pressed to think that he wouldn't get that number. But I mean, maybe he would go with something else, just because it's in a new team. But I doubt it. I'm pretty sure he's been three on every team he's been on.
He has. He has.
So that will be something to watch for sure, Ethan. Okay, for the last time, any final thoughts?
That's it for me, sir.
Same here, Ethan. We appreciate all you guys hanging out, watching all the content, hanging out with us earlier today, and checking this out as well. Don't forget to hit the like and the subscribe button below. Tell us your thoughts on the Chris Paul signing and what you think it means for the Spurs offseason and the Spurs next season. If you want to stay updated with everything, be sure to follow us on Twitter or X at SSPN on YT, at Jude McLaren, and at Ethan_Quintero. We appreciate you guys. We'll catch you all on the next one. Go Spurs, go.